The other thing is to consider the improvements, so retaining how the site is prepped, has it been compacted, is there trees on it impacting the effective area of the block versus the advertised square metre of the block. G'day guys, in today's video I'm in the car because we are going to go straight onto the road for one main reason, and that is to explain or step you through the exact process that I take to work out the value of land. Now, you might ask me, why is that actually important? Well, the reason why it's important to work out the value of land for two reasons actually, not just one. Firstly, if you're planning to do a property development or subdivision, you need to know exactly what that land is going to sell for, because that plus the cost plus what you buy the raw site for is the profitability of the project. And the second reason is, if you're planning to buy an investment property, particularly a growth investment property, one of the key cornerstones of a good growth property is a high land component value. And one of the ways that you'll work out what your land component value is take off the improvements of the property and basically pretend as if it's a vacant block of land, and then go around, work out how much that block of land is, and then you would know exactly what your implied land value is. And to make this video a lot more exciting than going out and just looking at some random blocks of land and explaining the theory about how you work out the value, I'm going to use the White Gum Valley case study, the actual live development site finding case study. So without further ado, let's get into it. I'm out at the first property here in White Gum Valley, and it's two street front 360 square metre blocks. To start out with just a quick theory lesson on how to work out or value blocks. Very importantly, dollar per square metre is something to consider. The other thing is to consider the improvements, so retaining how the site is prepped, has it been compacted, is there trees on it impacting the effective area of the block versus the advertised square metre of the block. So the effective area is what you can actually build on. So if there's things like trees and driveways that are there, that can reduce the effective area. Crossovers and access to the block, anything around the verge that might inhibit what you can do and design on it. The immediate vicinity is very important, and I'll talk about that with this property. And also the regularity, the size of the block, any design restrictions. So there's lots of things to consider, but what I find fundamentally most important is how much the square metre is. If it's rear or street front, is it a regular shape, and the frontage. Blocks that are over 11 metres in frontage are pretty good. Anything under 11 metres starts to discount the value of that block. The reason why you come out to properties is to work out locality, because this is important to consider when you are looking at blocks, because I find locality is the biggest impactor for blocks when you compare it against selling other things like apartments or completed villas, because the only thing you're effectively selling is the land and the location. You're not selling the finishes. You're not able to hide the location by changing the design of the house. So when you're looking at location, you're looking at detracting factors and positive characteristics. So detracting factors are things like right next door is a good example of a church. Some people really don't like being next to a church. Some people like it if they're part of the community, but often, if you can imagine, lots of cars coming in at certain times. The other thing is bus routes. I've talked about this before, but right by a bus stop. And these are just some of the locational aspects, and power lines. These are just some of the locational aspects to consider. In theory, with land as well, the other thing worth considering is the presentation of the land, the slope on it, how much retaining has been done on the property. And I'm going to get into that at the next property that I am going to. I'm out at the next property in White Gum Valley, and this is probably the most comparable block. It is street front, slightly irregular shape. It's about 408 square metres. It's on the market for $449. So this, on $1 per square metre, works out to about $1,100 a square metre, which I don't know. I'm going to double check on my phone.
Is that right? Yes.
$1,098 per square metre. What I like to do is talking about looking at blocks and comparing them in terms of the block specific characteristics. You want to know, has any earthworks been done? Is it retaining in the regularity of the block shape? How good the demolition was done? Also, is there fences or is it completely open? All these improvements on the land add or detract from how much this block's worth. This looks exactly how I'm going to present those proposed blocks. While I'm out here, the other thing which I like to do is have a look at how the developer has prepared the site. I've noticed it's added fences, but in terms of cleaning the fill, they haven't done that. So that means it's likely, because they're pretty close to finishing this, and the reason why I know they're close to finishing this is all the pegs are in, all the service connections are done in terms of the sewers down the back, and that means I don't have to go to full compaction on the block. The other interesting thing is they've had to retain a tree that's within the site boundary, so that tells me the council, more than likely, if there's large trees on my block of land, they're going to tell me to retain it. So it's good to look at other completed developments nearby and see what hoops the developers had to jump through in order to get their subdivision clearances. So anyway, on to the next property. I'm out at the next property in Hilton. Now, Hilton is not White Gum Valley, but the reason why I wanted to bring you here is to talk about how I surmise if I can't find enough comparable sales in the area which I'm looking. So if I couldn't find enough blocks, for example, in White Gum Valley, what I tend to do is look in other areas like Hilton for blocks that are for sale, and then I take into account adjusting it for the median house price. So because Hilton sells at say a 5 or 6% discount in terms of median price to White Gum Valley, I then basically add on the 5 or 6% discount and assume or surmise that that is the price it would achieve in White Gum Valley. The blocks behind me are 286 square meters. They're on the market for $240,000. So that works out to about $880 a square meter. Overall, I would consider the blocks inferior in terms of a rear block rather than street front, and also the dollar per square meter reflects that. So let's get on to the next property. The other thing, as I was walking back to the car, I wanted to say, notice the massive tree that is still on the block. By the looks of things, this council is wanting to retain trees. Now, having that massive tree right in the area that you're going to build also discounts the block's value because the effective area that you can build on is reduced. So what I tend to do is reduce the square meters of the block by the effective area that you lose when you have a tree that you cannot remove because of the council conditions. I'm at another property here in Hilton. This property is 313 square meters to rear block. I actually don't know what it's sold for, but the reason why I came to this property is to talk to you about what I look at. So I look at sold properties, I look at properties that are on the market for sale, and I look at properties under contract, and there's a reason for that. Firstly, the sold properties is the most compelling evidence. So if you can get a comparable property that has sold, this is the most compelling data that you should use. But you should also look at properties that are on the market for sale, because by looking at properties on the market for sale, you understand your competition and you understand where the price cap is, because there might be a superior property at a higher price and you're not going to achieve that price. So again, knowing your competition. And the other thing is looking at under contract properties like the one that you have behind me. The reason why I look at under contract properties like the one behind me is I want to see the momentum in the market. And what I mean by that is, if I have a sold evidence and I have an under contract evidence and the blocks are very comparable, but the under contract evidence has increased in that time or decreased, that will give me an idea as to what's happening in terms of price. It doesn't mean I'll adjust my price, but it will give me confidence in believing that the sold data is good data to use. So what I'll do after this is take some notes about the property and the location, give a call up to the agent and try and see if they'll reveal the under contract price before it comes out on RP data. Anyway, on to the next property. I'm out at the next property, which is in White Gum Valley. This is a rear block. It's 342 square meters. It's on the market for 386. It works out to about $11.50 a square meter. Now, the reason why I come to rear blocks is to talk about rear blocks versus front blocks versus blocks that come off a lane. So street front blocks obviously the most favourable. Then we go to blocks that come off the rear lane are the second most favourable, and then blocks behind an existing house is probably the least favourable. And also the house sometimes detracts from the block at the back. So when I take that into account, I'd be discounting the fact that this is a rear block when I'm comparing it against street front blocks. The other thing worth noting regarding rear blocks is how they make the calculations for the land. You just have to be careful as to if the effective area is the rear block and just the area you can build in, or have they added in the driveway. So what I tend to do is to double check the measurements by taking into account the distance to the rear of the block and the width of the block, and then compare that against the advert to make sure the effective building area is the same as the advertised area to give me the correct dollar per square metre price that this block is on the market for. On to the next property. I'm at the next properties, which are comparable sales evidence, properties on the market, properties that are under contract, which are small blocks in the new White Gum Valley estate. It's worth mentioning a few things about the White Gum Valley estate. Firstly, it's very hard to use blocks which are located in a new estate as comparable evidence in terms of an existing area. So the White Gum blocks that I'm planning on doing are in the existing suburb, whereas in this estate, often the land is already prepped, a lot of the site work's already done, which means that the improvements are better, but also it sells at a premium because you're located or surrounded by a lot of nice new properties. The other thing worth mentioning is these blocks are only about 280 square metres. They sell for in excess of $1,000 or $1,500 a square metre. And what you tend to find, the smaller and smaller blocks sell for the highest rate per square metre. So when you put a scatter plot of the size of blocks versus dollar per square metre, you find there's a pretty strong correlation. So what I tend to do is when I go back to the office, I would do that, and I would just make sure that the blocks that I am looking at, 400 square metres, sits within that scatter plot of the reasonable accepted rate per square metre. Anyway, thought that was important information to end our tour of comparable properties. Exactly the steps which I take to work out the value of land and the importance of working out the value of land, whether you're doing a project like a subdivision or you're buying an investment property. So until your next project or your next investment property, or most importantly, my next video, best of luck and goodbye.